Hello and welcome to the TransForm Tuesday webcast. I'm Dave McCormick, VP of Product Management here at Alpha Software. I'm joined today by Sarah Mitchell, who's in charge of our documentation department. Today, I'm going to be going over dashboards, and it's going to be part of a series of dashboards. Today is sort of basics, and we'll go over setting colors and setting up new tiles and doing different types of graphs. We'll get into some of the clustering as well as adding some TPL commands. So we'll dive in a little bit, but next week we'll start getting into even more stuff like user inputs and all kinds of cool stuff. So let's get started. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. All right, so today I'm going to be talking a little bit about dashboards. I'm not going to get too far into it because this is going to be over a series of weeks. But let me just dive in and show you something that I built about a week or so ago in TransForm. This is a pretty simple dashboard here. It's got 5 tiles on it, and it's using data that came from the field services solution example, which I'd shown maybe a year or so before. Let me show you the kind of data that's being collected by that, and I'll show you what we're going to do with it to turn it into a dashboard. So I've created, this is for think of it as a fake HVAC or air conditioning and heating company that has 5 employees. And this is about a year's worth of data, about 4,000 records or so. And when one of these fictional employees goes out to a job site, they collect some information. There's some information like what time they're supposed to be there, what the latitude longitude is, what the problems were that were encountered, and also any sort of check that was performed. Looks like everything passed here in this example. If there was an issue that was found, write down what the issue was. There's some pictures and some other things. Number of minutes that were accumulated, which we simply take by looking at the time that they arrived and the time they left and doing a little bit of math. I've shown an example of that before. So we have lots and lots of different fields that we can play with. So let's go back to the dashboard, and I'm going to show you what each of these tiles do and how I put them together. Now, the first one is kind of like a freeform tile, you can think of it. It's a text tile, and I'm going to go ahead and edit that. And actually, before I do, let me show you how the dashboard as a whole was set up, because that's kind of important to this example. So I'm going to click Edit, and what I've done is I've just created a dashboard called the Field Service Dashboard. And I wanted to make sure it only included the records that I wanted, because this TransForm account has more than one kind of form. I was only interested in this one, let me click on it once, the form for the diagnose and repair form. So that automatically cut down a certain number of records. And then also I didn't want I put in some sample records under my name, but I didn't want those to appear because they were kind of junk records. So I decided to filter that out as well. And what I was left with was 4,146 records. So how did I get this tile to display the number of records and even to do the math to figure out how many visits per day that works out to? Let me show you. I'm going to go ahead and edit this tile. And you'll see here that I'm going to basically go step by step and show you how it was put together. We'll start with the tile size. This is a small-ish tile. Actually, I think I should have just used these defaults here. Whoops, small, not short. And I told it it's not going to start on a new row because I do want to put something next to it. So I've set that to no. And then what I did was, because this is a text type of tile, see I have multiple choices here, I was able to set up a template. So my template was, might look complicated, but it isn't really. It's just the word HVAC pros that just shows up here. And then, because I'm allowed to use HTML, which is pretty cool, I put in an image tag, and I have it point to an image that I have hosted on my server, the same server where I keep my website. Doesn't matter where you put it, as long as it's accessible via the internet. So that's this part here. And then I wanted to know how many visits there were in a day. So I did a little bit of TPL. For this, I took the value of $-rows, and I took a look and saw how many rows were incorporated here using this function that's built into TPL. And because this is TPL, I enclosed this in brackets, and that's what I got. So you're probably asking yourself, hey, Dave, how did you know about this $-rows thing? Let me show you. Over here in help, put together kind of a nice set of help here, but beyond the help, and this is just dashboard help, if you scroll down, you are going to find a link a little further, and actually you'll find it in multiple places here, to the TransForm Analytics Quick Start Guide. Let me click on that, and I'm going to show you the documentation that we put together for you. It's pretty good. Let me go ahead and load that. And this takes you through all kinds of interesting stuff. How do you get to the dashboard? Who's allowed to use the dashboard and all that? And after the webinar, if you're interested in dashboards, absolutely go through this quick start guide. It gets really detailed, I think, for a quick start guide, but that's not a real problem. But one of the things it does get into is if you're interested in doing the TransForm programming language type of stuff, let me scroll to, you know what, I'm going to cheat and use the table of contents, is you can just jump right down here, and it's going to show you some of the values that you're allowed to get. So this, for example, dash rows is the one that I used to figure out how many rows were in it, and I used that with the length statement for it to tell me. But there's other things as well. You can get to the user inputs. We'll cover that next week, that someone may enter right on the tile, as well as other things as well. And you can get to the data, obviously both the metadata and also the form data. So let's go back here, take one last look at this tile, and you'll see that, so that's all we had to do, that $ dash rows. Now for this one, I decided let's just take that number divided by 365. So I did dash rows divided by 365, but because that would give me a long, nasty fraction, which I didn't want to look at, I used the round command. So this is all found in TPL. So just a little bit of TPL will do the calculations that you want. And I have a little bit more TPL to show you a little bit later on, but I just want to show you the basics right here of our first tile type. I'm going to go ahead and close that help, and I'm going to hit cancel. So let's take a look at this next tile. This is service calls by month. So in the service calls by month, which is, as you might expect, how many calls did we go out in these particular months? I put in all this data for 2019, so that's why it says that right here. Let's go ahead and let's edit the tiling to show you how this was put together. First of all, you're going to see that this is instead of text type, it is a chart type. For tile size, I made it medium, but also small so that it would fit next to the first tile that I just built. And then for here, I told it what type in the chart type data source and processing column. I told it that I wanted to use a line chart as my chart type. I could choose something else, like I could do bar chart. You'll see that it actually turns into a bar chart right before your eyes. Pretty cool. I'm going to turn this into a line chart. There are a whole bunch of other chart types as well we're going to get into. So there's the line chart. Now, the value processing type might sound complicated. It isn't really. All it means is, are you going to be, you do have some options here, but all it means is, are you going to be counting the values to figure out how many are here? Like, you know, this number of records satisfy the criteria. Or maybe you're going to be adding up values that are, you know, part of the field data, and then that would be a different type of thing. You do a type of sum of the numeric Y values. We'll do an example of that in a minute, but right now we're just interested in counting. We're counting the service calls in each one of these months. So we told it at the beginning, line chart, and we're going to be counting values. But what we haven't done it is actually told it what field we need to be looking at. So let's do that right now. I'm going to go down here to Graph X, and I'm going to ask it to choose what field. And to do that, first of all, I had to remind it that I'm using the diagnose and repair form. That way it knew to give me a choice of the fields on that form. So how to specify a value, choose from field lists. And here I chose a field that I inserted into my form called service date and time. Now, if I had done one for each service date and time, I would have a different point on this chart, not only for each date, but for each time. So I would have like probably 4,000 points on this chart. So that's the reason why we want to cluster these into months, which is what we're doing, clustering method for X. Now, I won't do it now, but just earlier I decided to turn off clustering, and I won't waste a minute of your time while it tries to plot 4,000 little things here in an illegible thing. But if you wanted to, you could do some other things like day of the week, for example. And now it just, because they only work on weekdays, you'll see they just see Monday through Friday values. But I decided that month made the most sense. So there's my month. So let's take a look and see how else this was set up. This graph Y, you don't use this. You'll only use this sometimes, but in this case, it's being ignored, so it's telling you it's being ignored. Graph group, here I could specify colors. There's really only one color here to specify, and it's defaulted to this blue one, but I could put in a different color. Like I could type in red, for example, and there it's in red. And actually, I'm going to go into colors in a moment as well, because there's some neat things that you can do. Lastly, the title, labels, and legends. So I wanted to say service calls by month, and I put it up at the top. And you notice how these dates down here might be kind of hard to see on your screen, but these dates down here are on a slant. You can probably at least see that they're on a slant of 45 degrees. Why did I do that? Well, if I put them with no rotation at all, you'll see that they kind of like, they crowd each other. You can't actually read the dates anymore. So I decided to put it at 45 degrees. And because I had changed this to 45 degrees, I needed to make a little bit of a bigger margin there. If I just use the default margin, you'll see it would have been cut off and that wouldn't have been any good. So I just use a large margin when you're using these rotation values here at the bottom. And we did not use any TPL functions in this case, but we will in another example, which you'll see in a minute. So that's how I put this whole thing together, and that's how we ended up with service calls by month. Now, one of the super cool things about TransForm is that when you build graphs, each one of these points, the TransForm knows what records were used to create or to calculate that. So for example, it knew all of the May 2019 records that went into this approximately 500 service calls. So I could click on that. And what will happen is, in a moment, let's click it. There we go. What will happen is it'll actually go out to the server and grab all of the form instances that were used to perform that calculation. In just a moment, it will come back. My computer's been a little slow today, though, so I'm not sure what's going on here, but we'll let it do its thing. And there it is. And here are my 500 records, and I can take a look at any of them. And you'll see, sure enough, ignore that create date. That's just when I added them to the API. Oop, my browser is slow. You'll see that the scheduled time should be, well, I must have clicked in June. The scheduled time is in June. All right, so let's go back to this dashboard and let's take a look at the remaining 3 tiles. Let's take a look first of all at this pie chart. This one's pretty easy. I'm going to show you how this works. I'm going to edit this one. Again, when we set up this tile, we decided that this is a chart type as opposed to list or text. The tile size we made small, but we had it start at a new line because we want this to be in a new row. That's how we arranged our dashboard. And then for the chart type, we just told it it's a pie chart. And again, we're just going to be doing a count of values. We want to know, in this case of filter inspections, how many times or what percentage of the time does a technician go to a service call and discover that the filter is dirty? I'm not sure why we want this information. I know it's a little contrived, but there are definitely other good examples that you can come up with this. So let's pop down here to Graph X. And again, I've chosen a field from the list. And again, I've chosen the form that I wanted to use first so that I could find data from that form. In this case, the field that I'm using is the one that's called check filter. Now, there's another one here. So I've chosen fields from a list. I've chosen the check filter field, and it's built exactly what I wanted it to do. Now, you're probably looking down here and saying, okay, what about how to display values, use descriptive text from the form's list definitions? This is actually a pretty cool feature, but it only applies when you are using fields that are list type fields. In this case, we're just using a button. We're using a button list, but that's not quite the same. So what you can do is you could say, show me the data that's actually being stored for that particular record, or show me what the descriptive text was. Let me give you an example of that. If you were, for example, looking at records that came from Massachusetts, whose abbreviation is MA, you might be storing MA sort of in the database, but you want to present the user with the choice Massachusetts all spelled out. And so in that case, if you said use the descriptive text, well, that's what you'd see. Again, we went with clustering method as by month. Again, this is ignored. And I've used two colors here to make these gray and these blue colors. And now would be a good time actually for me to take a quick diversion and talk to you a little bit about color palettes. When you're putting together, because I think that's all I have to show you here, other than the legend. So when you're putting together a dashboard, it's kind of nice to make all the colors look like they work together. They belong to the same color palette. And one super simple way to do that is just to find a color palette generator. I'm going to go over to Google, and there's lots of these. Color palette generator. There we go. And this is one I've used. It has a little bit of a few pop-ups here at the beginning, doesn't, but it's fine. There are some better ones as well. So I'm going to say start the generator. And in a moment, it just gives me different ones. I just hit the space bar, and it kind of gives me different color schemes that I might like. You know, obviously, if I've got a corporate color scheme that's been, you know, already dictated by a designer or something, I might be using that as well. But once I found something that I liked, not loving these, so this one's okay, I can select those hexadecimal colors and use them when I set up my chart. So that's just a nice thing to know, is to keep a palette of colors handy so that when you put together your dashboards, they look good. All right. So we went through that one. That one was pretty good. Let's take a look at total billable hours by technician. It's kind of similar to the other two that we've done, but not quite. So again, chart type is a chart. I've set it to a bar graph, and I did not start it on a new line. But this time, if you recall, last time I said I'd like to have a basically a count of the different X values, meaning does the record meet the criteria or not? That's not what we're going to be doing this time. This time we actually want to add up values from all of the records to come up with these values in the bar graph. So we're going to do a sum of numeric Y values. Okay, so let's go back down here, and we're going to do some clustering. Well, actually, let's go to Y, and I'll show you how that worked. So all I had to do for the Y values was I told it that I'm going to use the diagnose repair form, and that I'm going to, as opposed to choosing a field, I'm going to be using a TPL expression. And the TPL expression is my field called billable time. Now, the problem with this field is that it's in minutes, and I want it in hours. So what I did was I divided that by 60. And that's how I got the expression. Now, if I wanted to do total billable minutes by technician, which would make less sense, I wouldn't have to use the TPL expression. I could just use that field billable time, but I'm doing it as an expression, so that way I can divide it by 60 by the time it goes in. And of course, you could do any kind of calculation that you want before it goes in here as well. All right, so let's pop back here, though, to clustering. If you'll take a look, I've clustered these by the name of the technician. And I got their name just because they are the person to whom the whose metadata field was set to that person. But look, again, I've used a TPL expression. Let me just take you right through it. And the reason I did is because, well, I could have just used the person right here. The person also has their full email address next to it. In this case, all of the people happen to have @alphasoftware.com at the end of it. So this wouldn't really fit. I wanted these to be shorter. So all I did was I used a substring command. It's one of the built-in TPL commands. And I told it that I want to take everything except for the last characters, the @alphasoftware.com. And I did that using this expression here. So the negative tells it take everything except the ones at the end. And then the length is @alphasoftware.com. Now, @alphasoftware.com, I think that's like 18 characters. So I could have said -18 here, would have been the same thing. I just wanted to give you a more complete example of a TPL expression that's used for clustering. Not much more else to say. Let's take a look at the titles and legend. And here I've used, I've done nothing special here. And up here, tile size. Oops. Graph group. For graph group, I did use a specific color, and that's where you're going to find this is the graph group section is where you choose the colors. There aren't really groups. Each one is the same, you know, but it's but in cases like pie charts and stuff, you can specify multiple colors. And in fact, I'm going to do that here in just 1 minute. All right, before I go any further, are there questions on the 4 tiles that I've seen so far? Let me just open up my GoToMeeting interface. And, oh, I clicked on the June column. Yes, thank you very much. Okay, great. Thanks for everyone who's following along. That's great. Okay, so I'm going to pop down here and say, take a look at this last one. This is the summary of repair types. This is a donut type chart. Let me show you how that's put together. Again, chart type is tile type, sorry, is a chart. Tile size, I've decided to make it stretch the whole distance. So I gave it large and I started it on a new row. The chart type is a donut chart, and this is going to again be the kind where it counts. The record is either going to count in one category or it's going to count in another category, or maybe it won't count in any category at all. So we're going to do a count rather than a sum. So that's what we've done here, count of each discrete X values. So let's take a look and see how we do that, because we don't actually have fields that break down my records into these 3 categories. These are tiny, it's hard to read. Sorry, I'll tell you what they say. This one appears as electronics, this one says vents, and this says mechanical. So we wanted to know which of these broad categories did a repair type fall into. Now, I don't have fields on my form called electronics, vents, and mechanical, but I do have a series of checklist questions that deal with each of these. So I know, for example, the first checklist question I think has to do with vents. I haven't really looked in, but we'll see in a second. So I know that if they answered fail to that, then that's going to be a type of repair that needs to be done here. So let's go down to the graph X, and I'm going to show you how we put that together. All we did was we used this convenient function called problem type. Now you're saying to yourself, where did that function come from? How'd you know for it? I'll tell you. You can actually build your own functions. This is super cool. You can build your own functions here in Alpha TransForm for calculating this X values. Let me show you how I did that. It's not very hard programming. So I built a function called @ProblemType, and how to you can build functions. That's all described in the TPL documentation. And then I put it in an if statement. I said, look, if you failed check 1, 4, or 5, then the problem you have is with events. Otherwise, or else, if you failed check 6 or 8, the problem you have is electronic, and all the other ones are mechanical. So what this does is it gives you back these 3 values: vents, electronic, or mechanical for each one of the records, and that's how we use that to create those 3 different bits of pie chart. So let's take a look though and see this in action, because sometimes as you're building these out, you want to make sure that you're actually collecting the right data, that you've put together a TPL function that works. Well, what we've done is we've made that pretty easy here by allowing you to see the intermediate data. In other words, the data that, or the calculations that are being performed to come up with the values that are ultimately used here in this donut chart. So let me click the show intermediate data. And what you'll see is pretty cool. We have a list here, and it tells me form ID, or the form 0, that's the first form, was an electronics issue. Form 1 was vents, so is form 2 and form 3. There were mechanical issues for 4, 5, and 6. And so all of these are used and calculated based on what the technician had entered in on the ticket. Now, we don't show you all of them. I think we only show you like the first 1,000 or so, but that should be plenty to see whether or not you've got your algorithm set up properly. So that is how I put that together. I don't think I had to do anything else special. No, I didn't. All the tile types were the same way. So that is it. Next, that's all I want to cover for you today. We went into clustering. We went into a little bit of TPL, including using your own TPL functions, and we talked about the different types of graphs. But there's so much more to cover. So next week, I'm going to be showing you something called user inputs. Those allow your user to actually click, or I think even type in things here and search for them, or make checkbox selections and have it influence what's happening here in the tile. So I think you'll find that very interesting. All right, let me just do one last check here for questions to see if there are any. control panel here. What are the export options? Okay, I will show you the export options. Good question. So let's say I've done a big search here and I have decided that, let's see, who's my best performer here? I think B Fry is my best performer. Let's click on B Fry and let's get, oops, now it's going to load here in the dashboard. All right. And now we've selected all of these records from Bernard Fry. Now, if we wanted to just take these records and do something just with a subset, all we could do is we could just say check all to select all of our records. And then, wow, this is really slow today. I'm not sure what's going on with my browser. Okay, so under normal circumstances, you would click check all. Oh, there we go. And it checks all of these records here. And then you could go ahead and export these checked forms. So I'm going to tap on export. And we have a whole bunch of different ways you can export these. You can export them as a form, which means that you're going to maybe get a PDF of something that looks just like what you've created. You can do, you can export it as JSON, which you might use if you're to say designing or working with APIs and you just want to use some test data to see how it's going to work. It can be formatted into tables, basic and simpler, kind of like list views of them. You can also, though, download the data here as an Excel if you've gone with the, I believe it's the basic format. Sorry, or simple, I forget which one of them you'll choose, and you can download as Excel. And you're off to the races, as they say. Is there any option to export the actual dashboard as a PDF? Yes, in fact, there is, as a matter of fact. Great question. So the way you do that, besides just taking a screenshot, is I think we have a button. Actually, I don't know how to do it offhand, but I know you can do it. Let me, if you want to know the answer to that question, send an email to tfservice@alphasoftware.com and I will show you the right way to do it. I'll also demonstrate it next week. But yes, you can take a screenshot of this. And in fact, people have decided to use this sort of as their official record sometimes, so they can actually take it, print it out, put it in a 3-ring binder or something like that. Another question, can I use face recognition in TransForm? Well, that's an interesting question. I guess the way, right here, sorry, this is, let me go back to the first question. I figured out how to do the export. Click the export button, that's all you have to do. Thank you very much. Click export. And then I can say, who do I want to send it to? I can download it as a file, or I can send it as an email. Get it as a PDF right here. So that's how you do it. Use the export button. Thanks very much. Okay, next, can I use face recognition in TransForm? Well, I imagine you could, because we do have the ability for you to take pictures, and we have the ability for you to take those pictures and send them off to an API and get information back. In fact, we've had an example like this in the past where someone has taken a picture and sent it off to an OCR service, optical character recognition, so that the text that you took a picture of actually gets entered as text literally into the field without having to type it in. But it could also be used as a double check to make sure you typed it in properly. So I suspect what you could do then is take that same picture, that you've taken a picture of a person, base64 encode it, send it off to the API that does face recognition and get an answer back from that. If you're interested in more, send us an email, tfservice@alphasoftware.com. I think that would kind of be a cool example, and let us know what you might think about using it for. All right, well, it looks like we have come to the end of our time and also the end of our questions. So, hey, thank you everyone for showing up. Thank you, Sarah, for showing up and being backup, and Dan answering questions as well. If you do have more questions, send them to tfservice@alphasoftware.com. Hope to see you next week for another discussion of the TransForm dashboard. Take care and stay well. Bye-bye.